I just wanted a fresh coat of paint. Nothing outrageous, nothing wild. But the HOA had other plans. A letter arrived, filled with legal threats demanding I repaint immediately. Fines, lawsuits, the whole ordeal. They thought they had the upper hand until I made one call. My brother, a judge, was more than happy to respond. It all started with a simple decision, choosing a new color for my house. Nothing too bold, nothing that would turn heads, just a fresh, modern update. But the HOA had other ideas. A letter arrived laced with legal jargon and threats. Apparently, my chosen shade wasn't community approved, and if I didn't comply, I'd be fined daily until I repainted. I checked the guidelines, no explicit rule against my color. Yet, they insisted. It was about control, not compliance. The real problem? I wasn't one of their favorites, and they wanted to make an example out of me. That's when I realized this wasn't just about paint. It was about standing up to an overreaching HOA that thought they could bully homeowners into submission. They assumed I had no options, no way to fight back. They were wrong. Because what they didn't know was that I had a brother who understood the law better than any of them. And he wasn't about to let them get away with it. Homeowners associations are supposed to maintain the community, keep things in order, and ensure property values stay intact. At least, that's what they claim. But in my neighborhood, the HOA functioned more like a power-hungry bureaucracy, picking and choosing when and how to enforce their rules. I'd seen neighbors get fined for the smallest infractions. Grass half an inch too tall, a garden hose left out too long, even wind chimes that were apparently too disruptive. I never thought I'd end up on their radar, but the moment I decided to repaint my house, everything changed. I chose a neutral, modern shade, nothing garish, nothing outlandish. It was a color that blended well with the neighborhood, even complementing the few other homes. But the day after the painters finished, I found a notice taped to my door. Violation, unapproved paint color. It demanded immediate correction or I'd be fined $100 per day until the issue was resolved. Confused, I pulled out the HOA's guidelines and combed through them. Nowhere did it say my color was prohibited. It only mentioned that home exteriors should maintain a cohesive aesthetic, which was vague at best and intentionally open to interpretation at worst. Thinking it had to be a mistake, I contacted the HOA board for clarification. That's when the real trouble started. Instead of explaining why my color was an issue, they doubled down. A curt email arrived stating that my house did not meet the unwritten but understood guidelines, and that failure to comply would result in escalating fines and potential legal action. Unwritten but understood? That was a new one. It became clear this wasn't about the paint color, it was about control. Then came the intimidation tactics. I started receiving letters citing different sections of the bylaws, none of which actually applied to my situation. My mailbox became a daily reminder that the HOA was determined to make my life miserable. Board members whispered about my case at meetings, treating me like some kind of neighborhood rebel for simply choosing a color they hadn't pre-approved. They acted as though I had painted my house neon green when, in reality, it was a subtle, tasteful shade that other homes in the neighborhood already had. The difference? Those homeowners were in the HOA's good graces. I, apparently, was not. At first, I considered just giving in. Repainting would be expensive, but at least the harassment would stop. But then I realized something. If they could do this to me over something as small as paint, what was stopping them from pushing even further? What if the next homeowner they went after wasn't in a position to fight back? That's when I knew I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was standing up against an HOA that had overstepped its boundaries for far too long. And lucky for me, I had the perfect weapon to fight back. The first fine arrived within days. A crisp, official-looking letter informed me that I now owed $300 for failure to comply with HOA exterior regulations. That number would increase by $100 every single day until I repainted. I stared at the paper in disbelief. They weren't just enforcing an arbitrary rule. They were actively trying to strong-arm me into submission. I reached out again, trying to be reasonable. I sent emails, called the HOA office, and even attended a board meeting, hoping to have a civil discussion. Each attempt was met with the same dismissive response. Your paint color is not in compliance. You are required to correct it immediately. When I asked for clarification, they danced around the question, repeating the same vague nonsense about maintaining neighborhood harmony. Meanwhile, I watched other houses in the community, some with nearly identical shades, stand untouched, their owners unbothered. Then the threats started escalating. Another letter warned that if I failed to act, they would take further legal measures, whatever that meant. A few days later, I received an official notice stating that the HOA was preparing to place a lien on my house. That's when I realized just how far they were willing to go. They weren't just threatening fines anymore. They were threatening my home. The HOA president, Mr. Henderson, made it his personal mission to break me. He was the kind of guy who thrived on control, treating the neighborhood like his own little kingdom. If you played by his rules, you had nothing to worry about. But if you dared to push back, he made sure you regretted it. And I had pushed back. Hard. One afternoon, he showed up at my house, unannounced and smug as ever. He didn't even try to hide his amusement as he handed me yet another warning letter. "You're only making this harder on yourself," he said, like I was some unruly child refusing to obey. "If you just repaint, all of this goes away." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about rules or regulations. It was about power. He wanted me to cave, to admit defeat, to fall in line like everyone else. But I wasn't about to let a petty HOA president bully me into submission. I took a deep breath, looked him straight in the eye, and smiled. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Henderson," he said, keeping my voice steady. "But I think you'll want to be very careful about how you proceed from here." He laughed, shaking his head. "And why is that?" I took my time, savoring the moment before I said it. "Because my brother is a judge, and I think it's about time we had a little legal discussion about HOA overreach." For the first time since this whole ordeal started, Henderson's smug expression faltered. That night, I sat down with every letter, notice, and fine the HOA had sent me, spreading them out across my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. If they were going to come at me with legal threats, I needed to be prepared. So I started digging. I pulled up the HOA's official bylaws, reading them line by line, searching for anything that could justify their actions. And that's when I found it, something they clearly hadn't expected me to notice. The HOA had no official, pre-approved list of paint colors. Nowhere in the bylaws did it state that homeowners needed prior approval for exterior paint, only that colors should maintain the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. A vague, meaningless phrase that gave them just enough wiggle room to enforce rules however they pleased. But it got worse. As I cross-referenced cases from the past year, I realized something infuriating. Multiple houses had been repainted in colors similar to mine, yet none of them had received violations. The common denominator? Those homeowners were all known supporters of the HOA board. This wasn't about rules, it was about selective enforcement. They were punishing people they didn't like while letting their favorites get away with anything. Fueled by frustration, I made a call to the one person I knew could help, my brother. As a judge, he'd spent years dealing with cases of legal overreach, and the moment I explained what was happening, he knew exactly what to do. "They're bluffing, he said. "They have no legal standing to enforce this. If they push any further, they'll be in violation of state housing laws." That was all I needed to hear. Armed with this new knowledge, I drafted my own response, a formal letter outlining their inconsistencies, citing their own bylaws against them. I detailed every instance of selective enforcement, every contradiction in their reasoning, and I made it clear that any further action on their part would not only be challenged, but taken to court. And then, for the final touch, I signed off with a simple statement. Going forward, all legal matters concerning this dispute will be handled by Judge Brother's last name. I sent the email late that night, then sat back and waited. By morning, the response was exactly what I expected. The HOA had gone from aggressive to eerily silent. No more letters, no more fines, just a long, awkward silence. And that's when I knew. I had them backed into a corner. They weren't used to homeowners fighting back, let alone having the law on their side. And now they had no idea what to do next. A week passed without a word from the HOA, and just when I thought they had finally backed off, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a formal legal notice, an official demand stating that if I did not comply within 10 days, they would initiate legal proceedings against me. They were doubling down, fully confident in their power. What they didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment. With my brother's guidance, I had gathered every document, every inconsistency, every example of their selective enforcement. I wasn't just ready to defend myself, I was ready to expose them. I wasted no time in responding. This time, I wasn't just sending an email. I had my attorney, yes, my brother helped me find one, draft a formal reply citing specific state laws they were violating and the legal precedent that would work against them. The letter also demanded full disclosure of all fines and enforcement records from the past 5 years, something I knew they would never willingly hand over. The HOA board must have panicked because the next thing I knew, I was invited to a resolution meeting. It was supposed to be a discussion, but I knew what it really was, a last-ditch effort to intimidate me into backing down. When I walked into the meeting, I could tell they expected me to be alone, just another frustrated homeowner they could steamroll. Instead, I brought my attorney with me, and when he casually mentioned that my brother, a sitting judge, was also reviewing the case, I watched the color drain from the HOA president's face. At first, they tried to act tough, insisting they were within their rights. They waved around vague clauses about community standards, but my attorney shut that down immediately. That clause is unenforceable, he stated firmly. Your own governing documents don't specify any approved paint colors, and you have a history of allowing other homes with similar shades. What you're doing here is selective enforcement, and that's illegal. The tension in the room was suffocating. The board members exchanged nervous glances, but Mr. Henderson, the HOA president, wasn't ready to surrender just yet. We're simply upholding the integrity of the neighborhood, he said, trying to regain control. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. No, you're abusing your power. And if you really want to take this to court, we can. But I promise you, it won't end well for you. Silence. Then after what felt like forever, one of the board members cleared their throat and muttered, maybe we should reconsider. In that moment, I knew I had won. They had spent weeks threatening me, but now, faced with the reality of a legal battle they couldn't win, their confidence had finally crumbled. The silence in that meeting room stretched for what felt like an eternity. The once arrogant HOA board members, who had been so eager to push their agenda, now looked completely unsure of themselves. Mr. Henderson, the HOA president, seemed to realize he was no longer in control. The weight of legal reality had finally settled on his shoulders. Then, in a move that reeked of desperation, he scoffed and muttered, "We'll see about that." It was the last shred of defiance he could muster, but even he knew the fight was slipping through his fingers. I walked out of that meeting feeling victorious, but I wasn't naive. I knew the HOA wouldn't back down so easily. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received a notice stating they were reviewing the matter with their legal team. They were still trying to play hardball, but I was ready. My attorney wasted no time in filing a formal legal response, demanding that the HOA provide a full history of fines, enforcement actions, and decision-making processes related to exterior modifications. If they wanted a battle, they were about to get one. That's when everything took a dramatic turn. The HOA had been so confident in their threats that they never considered what might happen if someone actually fought back. When my attorney sent the request for records, it set off a chain reaction that spiraled out of their control. The HOA's own lawyer, realizing the extent of the issue, likely advised them to tread carefully. If they continued to push forward, they risked exposing themselves to not just my case, but a full-scale legal investigation into their history of enforcement. And then came the final blow, my brother. While he wasn't directly involved in my case, his mere presence in the background was enough to send shockwaves through the HOA. A sitting judge, reviewing their every move, they didn't stand a chance. A week later, the HOA abruptly dropped their case against me. No explanation, no further threats, just a sudden, quiet retreat. But the damage was already done. Word spread quickly among homeowners, and as people began digging into their own experiences with the HOA, more stories of unfair treatment surfaced. Turns out my case was just the tip of the iceberg. The HOA had been selectively enforcing rules for years, issuing fines to some while turning a blind eye to others. A few homeowners who had been too afraid to challenge them before now saw an opportunity to speak up. Some even sought legal counsel of their own. Before long, the pressure became too much for the board to handle. A group of frustrated homeowners filed an official complaint against the HOA, citing unethical practices, financial mismanagement, and abuse of authority. The case caught the attention of local news outlets, and once the spotlight was on them, the board had no choice but to back down completely. The aftermath was nothing short of poetic justice. Mr. Henderson, the man who had been so eager to wield his power over me, was forced to step down as HOA president. A full audit was conducted on the HOA's finances, revealing multiple questionable expenditures that had nothing to do with neighborhood maintenance. New leadership was voted in, and with them came long overdue policy changes, ones that ensured no homeowner would be unfairly targeted again. As for me, I kept my house exactly the way I wanted it. My paint color stayed untouched. And every time I walked outside, I did so knowing that I hadn't just won my case. I had helped spark a change that benefited everyone. Looking back, I never imagined that something as simple as choosing a paint color would turn into a legal battle. But it taught me something important. When people in power abuse their authority, they rely on fear to keep others silent. The moment you push back with knowledge, confidence, and the right support, they start to crumble. And that's exactly what happened here. The HOA thought they could intimidate me. They thought they could bully me into submission. But in the end, they were the ones who backed down because they never expected me to fight back. And they certainly never expected me to win. Looking back, this experience was more than just a fight over paint. It was a lesson in power, persistence, and the importance of standing your ground. The HOA operated on intimidation, assuming no one would ever challenge them. And for a long time, they got away with it. But when people in authority abuse their position, they count on silence to keep their control intact. The moment you push back, their foundation starts to crumble. This whole ordeal taught me that knowing your rights isn't just useful, it's necessary. Too often, people accept unfair treatment simply because they don't know they have the power to fight back. But laws exist for a reason, and organizations like HOAs aren't above them. When you understand how the system works, you stop playing defense and start taking control. Most importantly, I learned that bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, are never as invincible as they pretend to be. The moment they realize you're not afraid, they lose their grip. And sometimes all it takes to bring them down is one person refusing to back down. If you've ever dealt with an overreaching HOA, I want to hear your story. Have you faced unfair fines, ridiculous demands, or power-hungry board members? Drop your experience in the comments. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had to push back. And if you love real-life stories of justice and standing up to authority, hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more to come.